School choice is about giving the poor and the middle class the same rights the rich have always had.
I think there are a lot of major holes in the logic behind vouchers.
Our students, they're not worth any less than they are in an ISD.
My first priority is to fund public education.
What is the role of government? What about separation of church and state? And what is the consequence for those who are still in the public schools?
Hi everybody, I'm David Bacon along with Abby Green from KRBC News. Glad to have you along here on Big Country homepage as we continue our coverage of school choice in the state of Texas, a very hot topic. And this roundtable discussion tonight will be featuring Walt Landers, who's from San Angelo. He's with the Texas Leadership Public Schools. He's the founder and CEO. We're also joined by Sammy Garcia, former AISD board member here in Abilene, concerned citizen. Coming up from Rowena, we have Chris Martin, a homeschool father and educator, to get his perspective. And we also have two members, one new member, or hopefully a new member of the Texas legislature, Mitch Little, who's running for the Republican nominee for House District 65, which is in Denton County, and current incumbent Stan Lambert, who's won re-election in House District 71, representing Taylor, Jones, and Nolan counties.
Well, thank you all for being here with us tonight. So we'll start things off and kind of go around the table here. What is your stance on school choice and why do you feel that way?
Well, we thought we were school choice. In 2008, when we won the charter, I took a small private school and made it a public school and just gave parents another option. And so we were working to keep the same culture, mission, vision, values that we had, and be able to give free education, which was a real burden to a lot of the parents that were trying to pay for private education. So since then, we opened with about 630 something in year one, and in year 16 now, we've got 4,300 kids in 5 different communities. So we believe it is a viable option. And for that school choice in the charter school world, it's already existing, you know, and a lot of parents, they're already choosing that.
Good. I would like to follow up, if you don't mind, about what
Absolutely.
is the difference between charter and private schools. You mentioned that. So what's the difference for those who are unaccustomed to those terms?
Yeah, so we have a contract with the state, so we're privately run, but it's publicly funded. And so we're not allowed to charge tuition. And so parents are able to come, kids are able to come to us, and we don't receive the same money as an independent school district. They keep their local tax-based money, and we don't receive the facility funding money. So we get a lot less money than what a traditional public school would receive. But, we still have to meet all the same accountability and all those kinds of things. Where a private school, they're privately run, parents fund it, or they have to raise money to be able to fund that, but they're under no accountability.
All right. Sammy?
Well, I'd start off first by questioning whether or not it's really choice. Let's just call it what it is. We're talking about school vouchers, because you mentioned the controversy, and that's where the big controversy is. We've been living with the schools like your own for a while now. And we've learned to adapt to those, and public school system has. But what you're looking at doing is, the reason I'm against it is you're looking at literally taking away choices. Because if you go to this voucher system is not going to give everybody the same choices. It's not going to be at the same level. And so I even question why you would call, that it would be a discussion about choice. Let's just have a discussion about vouchers. Because that's what it comes down to, is whether or not you're going to let somebody use the money that is designated for their child to go to a private school and help subsidize. I would almost call it a subsidy for a lot of private schools. And then when you live in the rural areas, how much private school options are there? There are not very many. And the more rural you get, the tougher it gets. So right now, as far as school choice, hey, that's wonderful. This is about vouchers. That's the big controversy, and I am definitely against vouchers.
Chris?
Yeah, so as a homeschool parent, first and foremost, I got to give all the credit to my wife because she does really the heavy lifting. I'm in healthcare as an occupation, and in the nursing home system, and that's the space that I work in, money follows the patient, and it's been a conversation in the state for a long time, and money has moved that direction. Money follows the patient. Those rules did pass through, and so I think as a homeschool parent, let me say this: we are blessed to live in the great state of Texas, where we do have choices and options. So I think that school choice is really a blanket statement. It really is about what you mentioned about it's about the money, and we follow the dollars. So I think that it's one thing to say that I live in a rural community, so we have very limited options as to the public school or private school options that are near us, and so we have for 15 years chosen to homeschool our children. But every story is unique. I mean, we all have, as educators, and I say educators, I'm talking about parents. We are the primary educators. We all have different places that we come from. So I think it's difficult to just blanket. I believe you're absolutely right. It's about where those tax dollars are going and what they're being spent on. And here's the thing. It doesn't matter how much money you spend. It's about what you spend it on. So it's difficult to say that I'm just for it because usually when a piece of legislation is written, there's a lot of things that are earmarked with that. So, but I do believe that the money should follow the student. I do believe parents should have that choice. And I think that the free market would make the right choice in the end.
Stan, you've got the unique perspective of having been on AISD board, and now you're in the Texas legislature, so you see this from several angles. Your thoughts on school choice, school vouchers?
I think my record is fairly well known. I voted on several occasions in the legislature, particularly last session, against the voucher component, both in the budget process and then when an actual bill did come to the House floor, I voted against vouchers, or I supported an amendment to remove vouchers from a funding bill that was a pretty comprehensive bill that would have addressed some of the funding issues. And I think that's really where you have to start. I think you start with the funding issue, the money. We have been underfunding public education for a long time. Mr. Garcia and I were on the board back in 2010 here in Abilene when the state cut $5.5 billion out of education funding, and we've been playing catch up for the last 14 years. The last time that there was any bill or legislation passed that provided an increase in the basic allotment or for teacher raises was 2019. That was before COVID, that was before inflation. We have not seen any increase in funding. And so I would set out, first of all, the argument from my standpoint is the whole issue of funding, and do we have the money to accommodate a brand new entitlement program that basically has no accountability restricted. We don't do anything in the state of Texas. And really, as a Republican and a conservative, this is so anti-Republican. We're talking about creating a whole new bureaucracy that's going to be funded with dollars that will siphon away from public schools. Texas has 10% of the total population in the United States under 18 years of age. 10%. We're the 8th largest economy in the world. And yet we rank 42nd or 43rd in the entire country based on per pupil spending. To me, that's unacceptable. And until we decide to commit to public education and to fix some of the problems, I'm not saying we're perfect. We have a lot of ways we can improve. But like Walt said, we've made a lot of progress in terms of providing more choices. If you just look at in the last 10 to 15 years, and I can only talk locally. I don't know a lot about Denton County, to be honest. I can only talk about my district and the schools that I represent. We've made tremendous progress in creating more choice within the public education system as far as STEM, as far as career tech. We've got programs and partnerships where we're creating, Holland Medical High School. It is unbelievable what public education has done just in the last 15 years to create those choices within our system. And so I kind of agree. I think we already have choice, but my biggest issue is creating a new system, basically, and where the dollars are going to come from without any accountability.
And Mitch, you get the last word on this.
Oh, you're so fine. Well, David and Abby, thank you for having me out here to Abilene. I've got a number of thoughts. I think I'm a huge proponent of school choice. I think that it's a necessary component and complement to a robust public education system. Let's talk about the data. So here in House District 71, there are 48.7% of students, grades 3 through 12, who are reading below grade level. There are 61% of students who are performing math skills below grade level. All the while, of course, we're creating a massive debt balloon in the state. We've got $188 billion of debt on ISD school boards, or on ISDs throughout the state of Texas. Something like 60% of school districts in the state have passed deficit budgets. Within the last week, Abilene ISD passed I believe it's a $13 million deficit budget. Austin ISD's deficit is $119 million. Obviously, there are some things within school finance that we need to look at. But here's what I want to emphasize to you and to your viewers. We need to be looking at the data and let the data help us decide what actually drives positive student outcomes. There are 32 states in the United States that have some form of school choice. In the state of Florida, after they implemented universal school choice in Florida under Governor Ron DeSantis, they actually were a top 10 throughout the country increase in testing scores for students in the Florida school system. In Indiana, you saw gigantic gains. In Arizona, you saw gigantic gains, especially among low-income students in terms of how they're performing on testing. And I know you don't have that problem here in Abilene or House District 71. You have great teachers, you've got great schools, but that's not the case throughout Texas. In inner city schools and urban areas, you've got a lot of students and families that are trapped. They're trapped in failing schools. And if they had a choice to go to a charter school like yours, or if they could afford to homeschool like you do, or if they could afford to go to a Christian school, I've got neighbors in my neighborhood who are going, man, I really hope that you can pass some form of school choice that can affect me, because if I had the choice, I would send my kids to a Christian school. There are a lot of people throughout Texas that feel the same way. It's not to say that public schools don't need to be well-funded or need to function well. In fact, it's required in the Constitution that we support an effective public school system. And I think we're doing that. I think there are some perverse financial problems with public school funding in Texas.
Mitch, you want to follow? Go ahead.
Can I say something? You know, the statistics you just gave about our area,
Yes.
if you were just looking at that, you know, without really understanding that we just had a pandemic situation where we had to literally, I still remember I was on the board at the time, and I remember the superintendent he said, we're building the plane as we're flying it. We literally were making things, we literally found out how many of our students didn't have internet. We were driving our students to campuses just to get internet service. You know, when all of a sudden these statistics that you talked about, they're not normal. It's a result of what we just went through. And it uncovered so many deficits that we had for our families, especially our low-income families. You assume that whenever you talk about that we're all on the same basis, financially, resources-wise, but we're not. And if you use these statistics from right now, then that's so unfair, because you're sitting there going, we're still coming out of this from a learning standpoint, from what our kids had to go backwards on. Just getting them to get up and go do their homework was a challenge for parents and that kind of thing. So it wasn't something that it's just a result of, because my kids, Stan's kids, a lot of kids went to my public education and they're doing great. They went through AISD. It's a tremendous school district. And so the answer basically is, let's take away more money from where we're lacking in resources, so let's take more away from them, and you don't just do it in a snap. Mm-hmm. That's just it. It's something that's going to happen over a period of time. So by the time you realize it, these schools are even in a bigger deficit, and they're also shorter on resources. And who's the one that gets hit? It's that lower income family that has the fewest number of resources that we learned that don't even have internet sometimes to be able to work or go to school remotely. So I'll say that just because I want to make sure that people understand that those statistics are not a true picture of the job, for example, that AISD, because we're the biggest boy in the area. So just to make that point.
Can I respond to that?
Sure, yeah.
So very important. I want to talk about some data that's not affected by the pandemic. So Texas is #1 in the country for construction and land spending in schools. Out of the schools in Abilene ISD, 33% of the dollars that go into Abilene ISD make it to the teachers. 33%. Those are the people who are serving our students. They're the tip of the spear for learning, for testing, and 33% of the budget goes to them. 21% of it goes to interest expense and capital outlay. So when you look at the amount of money that's going into interest expense and capital outlay, we've got schools that are overburdened by debt, overburdened by administration. If we had competition to introduce into the system, if we had the free market to be able to say, hey, maybe there's a better way of doing this, maybe everyone would improve.
Let me make a comment if I may. You made the point of, and I think this is a great misconception, and as a homeschool parent, I can greatly speak to this because for 15 years we've been homeschooling, and it's not the wealthy people that get to homeschool. We make a sacrifice. My wife is a dental hygienist. She doesn't get to go perform what she went to school for, what her parents paid for her to go to school for. We made a sacrifice. We don't just live in a big fancy house and get to live high on the hog and get to homeschool our children. That is a complete misconception. We make sacrifices that I think other people just simply aren't willing to make. And so I think that there's a lot of confusion about where these dollars are going, what they're being spent on. I appreciate you saying that because I always say, you know, the Friday night lights are surely bright, aren't they? And I love football. We were talking about football before we came, before we got started. So I'll make the comment, it's not how much we spend, it's what we spend it on. And I completely agree that the teachers are not being the recipients that they should.
Stan,
I would ask Stan, are you talking about 33% of the overall budget, or are you talking about a general?
Well, let's just make a separation here. The bonded indebtedness that Mitch is referring to is voter-approved indebtedness. The local voters have an opportunity every time a bond proposal comes before them to decide yay or nay. We want to take on that additional tax burden, or we don't want to take on that additional tax burden. The state does nothing to fund the M&O tax rate that we're talking about here, which is the operational funding that comes in to pay teacher salaries, that pays utilities, pays for fuel for the buses, pays for food costs. That's the M&O that we're talking about as being deficient right now. I'm not referring to the big stadiums that have been built in places like Allen and Plano and other places around the Metroplex. And maybe that is a big burden that some of those taxpayers are having to shoulder now. But they voted on that. They either approved it or they didn't approve it. And they might have voted against it, but if the majority said we want a new stadium, then by golly, they built a new stadium. So I think we've got to make sure we differentiate between INS funding and M&O.
Chris, I can tell there's something right on
Yes.
the tip of your tongue.
Well, I don't know if this is the moment, but I've just recalled Proverbs, you know, raise your children up in the way they should go. This is all about our children, right?
Yep.
Raise your children up in the way they should go, and if you do, they will not depart from it. I think what we forget is the very next verse, which is the borrower is slave to the lender. That's all I can think about as we talk about the budget and we go into deficits and we're trying to educate our children, and we're raising the situation in the wrong way.
But when you look at that general budget, that operation budget, go to any school board meeting that approves budget, and that part that goes to teachers is well over 80% every single time. It has been for years. You hear that discussion annually every year when people talk about how much of the money actually goes to teachers and administrators. It's always over 80%. So you're not talking about the same money. You're talking about some that's been approved and some that's general. And I don't ever, of all the years I've served, I'd be surprised if Stan can remember ever approving a budget where the operation part that included salaries for teachers and administrators was anything below 80%.
Can I speak to that?
You sure may.
So as a charter school, because of the lack of funding that we receive in comparison, I have to run a 65% salary and benefits. And yet I'm held to the same accountability in basically all the areas that an ISD is held to. And I'm expected to perform on that much less. And over 16 years, we've been able to do that quite well. Through what is happening with special education and some of the burdens on what they're doing to special ed and the STAR test and the way that's being laid out and some of the other things that we're facing that's being driven out of TEA, school districts are going to suffer in this. But it does show one of my representatives there out of my area in San Angelo. We've had this discussion in the past, and he knows that public schools do have the ability to be more disciplined and operate better because we have to. We have no choice. I have to have enough left over for operations and for facilities. And so in our pay, are we behind the public schools in what we can pay? Yes, we are. But, it's just we've had to learn to live with that and deal with that. Now, I have to get creative. We have to go outside. We've got to find outside tutors. We've got to find volunteers, other ways to be able to educate kids and resource kids and do things that is thinking outside the box. But that's what charter schools were created for 30 years ago. My concern in this whole process is, again, obviously they know that here's what it takes to be able to educate a kid. And so they're throwing out a number of $10,500 per child, regular ed, $12,500 for special ed, and yet we're still with a base of $6,500. And if we have all the other things that you do with CTE and things, you might get close to that. But there's going to be a big struggle in this. And I don't know why the drive for 8AF and all these other kinds of things aren't being talked about in a stronger way, especially in a community like Abilene. Abilene, 68, 70%. We're at 68% low social in economic disadvantage in our school. In Abilene, ISD, I believe, is right there at 70. And in special education, so I'm in 5 cities. I'm in the Metroplex. This is Abilene. We have the highest special education population in Abilene. When I looked at Abilene ISD, I had to look at old data, but they're even higher than we are. So you're talking, we're at nearly 15%, and Abilene ISD is at over 16% of special education. And now, since they pulled all the Star Alt to where you can't get those kids to be able to really take the alt like they used to, and so those kids are having to perform at the same level. Now the fail rate on special education is so high that it's gonna pull down the scores. And so I don't understand why there's not any more common sense in this to be able to make those allowances. I'm in Midland in the Permian Basin, and it's super crazy out there. A lot of the schools are just trying to find a warm body to put in the classroom because we've driven educators out of the school districts because of it's not about the money. It is about the overburden. Teachers feel like that all they spend their time doing is researching data and trying to find all the stuff instead of just educating the children and be able to see them a success.
And I think, David and Abby, the challenge here is that there's been so much talk about this. There's so many iterations out there about, are we talking about a limited school choice program? Are we talking about universal that the governor espouses and wants passed? Who's going to qualify? Is there going to be an income limitation? There's so many different things. From my perspective, I keep kind of going back to the bill, the legislation that basically we looked at back in November and December. And that's kind of where my basis for forming some of my opinions come from is, okay, here's what that bill was going to provide. It was going to start out very limited, $500 million. Only about 40,000 students were going to really fall into that category of being qualified to receive that. But as you know, there's no government program that starts small and doesn't get large over time. And so when you start looking at the budget ramifications, and this is the Legislative Budget Board, this isn't not a partisan group. They look at bills and they decide what is the economic and financial impact to the state of Texas if this bill passes. And the fiscal note on the bill that we looked at last November was going to be in the next 4 or 5 years was going to be upwards of $4 to $5 billion because that $500 million was going to grow.
That was one of the questions we were going to ask a few
Yes.
minutes, Abby, was about sustainability of this.
Yes. What is that looking like? What would y'all think that would look like long term? Is that sustainable, or would this be sustainable?
Well, again, I think it depends on what other restrictions are in that legislation and who would qualify. Again, the governor's idea is a universal program, which means anyone could qualify. It doesn't mean that you haven't had a kid already, just has never been to a public school or a charter school, but has always been in private school. But why should the taxpayer fund a family who's already made that choice? And then why would a family that has a special needs child that is going to go into a private school, but the private school doesn't have the federal and the state qualifications, doesn't have the staffing and the training necessary to meet the needs? I heard someone, maybe at one of the committee hearings just the other day, talk about, well, 70% of our private schools in Texas offer special needs children. They've got the services. I can tell you that is from A to Z. That may be a very limited type of child that has a special needs issue to the ones that are most severely impacted, that might have a trachea tube that a teacher or a staff aide may be having to service on a 8-hour basis while they're in the classroom. So that that argument really, I mean, has so much difference in terms of what we're really talking about. So until you really see the specifics of a bill or a legislation, it's hard to determine what are the long-term impacts or what are the long-term ramifications. Mitch brought up a good point. There are a lot of other states that have adopted this, 30 to 32 states, and others are considering it. But the reviews are mixed. There's some, like Mitch said, that are having some success. There are others like Ohio, Indiana, Louisiana, Arizona now saying their budget is busted because they've got too many people that are applying. It was noted yesterday that one homeschool person used the funding to buy a dune buggy and tried to justify that as an educational cost. So you've just got so many things that could fall into this discussion, but until you can kind of wrap your arms around a little, something that's a little bit more, I guess, proposed as here's the policy going forward, then it's kind of difficult to really predict what the outcome in the long
Mitch, I have a
run.
question for you about why is the Governor Abbott seemed so fixated on this to the point of where he went after 20 state legislators who did not agree with school vouchers, including Mr. Lambert. Why is the governor so fixated on this issue of school vouchers?
Yeah, I think if the governor were here, he'd say, this is the program that I believe is going to improve education in Texas. We've seen kind of full-scale adoption in Florida, and they've made significant gains. Your question was really about sustainability, Abby. Can we sustain this? One, it depends on the size of the program. As Stan pointed out very clearly, if we're doing a much smaller program as a function of the poverty limit, and then trying to see how it goes and grow it from there, that's one thing. If we were to do universal right off the bat, what is the cost impact on the taxpayers of Texas? It could be a lot. It would be a lot more significant. I think if you look at other states that have adopted universal, I think you're looking at probably a 5 to 6% of total students uptake of people who are going to actually access the program. And just to be clear, I'm a little bit of an anomaly in the primary season. My primary wasn't about school choice. I am a school choice proponent, but I think what you saw from Governor Abbott was really a desire to put his stamp on education in the state of Texas long term, to say, hey, Texas was on this trajectory. I believe we're ranked somewhere between 38th and 40 nationwide in education in terms of how our education system is functioning, and saw this as a lifeline to, hey, this is an opportunity where we can actually change the future for Texas children, help get some of our scores out of the ditch, and give people an opportunity to see a future for themselves that's maybe a little bit different than the one that they have now.
Can I say something? I want to bring something up that's a little bit different. And that is, I'm the past chair of the Workforce Development Board for the 19 county area. I've served in that capacity for a couple of years. And there's a bunch of employers here, okay? I've been one for years. One of the things that we have to remember is we have a problem with workforce right now. We have a problem with availability, with skills that are available. Right now, I'm still looking for a person. I have been for about 2 years that will meet the qualifications, do everything I need to have another salesperson, right? Well, one of the things and Stan mentioned this earlier, that our public schools have done a really good job finally, and it broke through probably 10 or 15 years ago, where we finally started putting business and education together. The Holland, the Lift, the schools where we are teaching now career development. We actually have career counselors. This area actually was on the forefront of developing that. We've been ahead of the game for about 15 years. The Workforce Development West Central Texas, we've been doing this for years, because one of the things that we always said is there was these silos that kept them apart. Well, they're growing together. And if you start to take funding away from that, what's going to happen to those great partnerships that we have worked with workforce, with employers, with all this, are they going to be able to continue? Because that is a huge part. SB, was it 1? That required some of the career tech training?
I think so.
I think it was SB 1, about 6 years ago maybe. I lose track of time. But it was legislated. So you're starting to really see some development there. And if you go to talk to Mary Ross, one of the best executive directors of workforce in the state of Texas, in my opinion, the country, and ask her about how we've come together as school districts, as charter schools, public schools, private schools, and found that we have to do that. Well, I'm sitting there going, what's going to happen if we start to pull some of that? What are the first things that are going to go? Or some of those relationships and some of those programs are going to get funded. That's huge for business. Business people really need to be thinking about this, because our biggest resource for employees is public schools.
Yeah, it's very admirable what y'all are doing, Sammy. One of my friends, Representative Gary Gates, out of the Fort Bend area in Houston, has a bill that he's been fighting like a wild animal to get passed for vocational training, just for that purpose, to bring students along and give them an opportunity to build a career. What I want to make sure that your viewers understand is that the way that this issue is going to come to a head probably is over money between not only this program, but public education. As I understand it, Pub Ed is going to ask for a $1,300 increase to the basic allotment. So for your viewers, just doing the math on that, my understanding is for every $100 we increase the basic allotment, it's an $800 million hit to the budget. So my understanding from Pub Ed is the ask is going to be $10.4 billion increase to the budget. So there is a lot of money at stake here. It's not so much ideology as it is finances. So the collision you have here that's coming, that you're going to see in the legislative session, is school choice, what size, Pub Ed, how much do we fund it, and can we afford all of this?
Okay, we need to start wrapping this up, gentlemen. Well, I'll give you we'll go around the table for a final word. We'll start with you.
Yeah, I would say that, keying off of some of what was said earlier, I'm definitely for choice, but in those choices, sometimes we have to look at how do we make sure that those dollars, especially tax dollars, aren't being abused, aren't being misused. And I hear the stories, being now 16 years in this, of what took place in the early years of charter schools when they didn't have any early accountability. And there was some real craziness that went on. And there's some guys, I think, still serving prison because of that. And so if we don't implement the right kinds of guardrails in this and protecting those dollars, because there's more than likely the governor, he's going to get what he wanted. And so vouchers are going to happen maybe in some form or some fashion. But I'm hopeful that legislators will, again, fund public schools, because if you're not careful, what will happen, private schools can attract and draw students that could not afford to go. But I know private schools. I was a private school. We didn't take care of special education. We didn't take care of the CTE, and we didn't take care of dual credit. And where, as a charter school, we also do all those things. And we try to close that gap between the CTE and giving them as many dual credits as possible so that it pushes them along for their next journey. And if you're not careful, those kids that get attracted to private school, where do they go from there?
Sammy?
Real quick, one thing I'll tell everybody about me, and if you live in Abilene, you know this about me, I'm a lifelong Democrat. Stan Lambert is a lifelong Republican. But when we were at that table working together, that never came up. It was always about what is best thing for the kids and the teachers of our, and that's where, if we don't get past this political situation where we're just lighting it on fire and going after people, this is never going to get resolved. And it's not, you're not going to have that. So you got to talk facts, you got to talk this, and you have to act like like you served on the school board. Because when you're on the school board, none of that stuff matters. It's all about making hard decisions. He and I are politically different. But I promise you, we've had discussions about education that have a lot of commonalities, because it's not about an R or a D, it's about whether or not we can provide the best for the kids in our community.
Chris?
As a homeschool parent, I sit here and I get the fortunate ability to sit here and talk with you guys, and I thank you for all of what you do. When we're talking about me as a taxpayer, and we're all taxpayers, about where my dollar goes, I just would like to have a choice in the say of where that dollar goes. I've got 6 girls. My wife and I, and I'd love to be able to take those dollars and fund their education with it as a choice of my own. You know, we were actually going to go to the nearest public school, but we were turned down because we didn't pay taxes in that district. And so my choice was very limited. It was shut down. Even though it was closer for me, it was on my way to work, all of the things that would have made logical sense, it didn't make sense to the public school system. And so we made our effort. And we tried. And so these may seem anecdotal, but we all have an anecdote. We all have a life. We all have a story. And not all of us have the same number of children. Gosh, 6 girls. But
God bless you.
I need it. But it is a joy to be able to spend every day with those kids, with our kids, and so I wouldn't change it for the world. I'm grateful that I get to make that choice now. There are other places where you go to jail if you homeschool your kids, so I am grateful for that at this point. But as a taxpayer, I would love to be able to take those dollars that I spend into the system and apply those directly to where I believe is best. Every single one of our 6 kids all have a different program that they follow. If they went into a public school system, they would all have the same programs. And they're very unique. And I'm grateful to be able to make that choice now. I just think the dollars should follow my kids.
Stan.
Student outcomes have to be the primary focus of anything that we do in the legislature. And the voucher program that has been discussed, that has been brought to the table, that we've looked at, has no accountability. So how can we measure outcomes unless we have accountability? We wouldn't know 5 years, 10 years down the road whether a student that did take a voucher and went to a private school or homeschooled, how are they doing? Are they doing as well as they would have in a public school or in a charter school like Walt runs? We need that accountability. In fact, if we don't have a level playing field, I've heard the argument, well, this is going to increase competition. I'm fine. I was a banker for many years, and we had lots of competition among the banks that in the communities I served. So I'm for competition, as long as it's a level playing field. And so when you talk about taking public dollars and paying for private education with no accountability, then you can't measure those outcomes like I would be able to measure, or whether whoever replaces me 10 years from now would be able to say, here's the data, here's the information we need to decide whether we need to continue to fund this program at the current level, add more funding. I would go back to the Texas Constitution and just say, the Texas Constitution in Article 7 says the state of Texas will provide a general diffusion of knowledge in a free public education environment. And so I am against using public dollars to finance private education.
Yeah, I would just say, from my perspective, I think your viewers, Texas taxpayers and voters, we can trust them with their money. And it is their money. It's not Stan's money. It's not my money. It's not the government's money. It's not the state of Texas' money. It's ultimately the taxpayers' money. We need to be able to trust them to make the best educational choices for their children, and not only to have the ability to make those choices, but to choose a school option that reflects their values as a family too. You know, there's some things that aren't taught in public schools that you might see taught in a private Christian school, like that God creatively and intelligently designed planet Earth for your and my benefit. And if a family has an opportunity to change the trajectory of their child's education and put it into alignment with their values and use their money to do it, I think that's a really good thing fundamentally. I think that what's going to happen here is we're going to change the leadership in the Texas House. It's going to be reformatted, and we're going to work together with the Senate in Texas to pass this bill. The governor's going to sign it, and I think we're going to start to see increases, upticks in student outcomes in Texas, just like you saw in Florida.
I disagree with that, but I think the leadership will remain the same.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. So many times we watch political discussions on TV that wind up in shouting matches. So I appreciate the fact that all 5 of you gentlemen could join us tonight, and we could sit down, civilly talk about this, and everybody can speak their mind on and how they felt. So thank you all very much. Abby, thank you.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you, David.
And thank you for watching on BigCountryHomepage.com.
School choice is about giving the poor and the middle class the same rights the rich have always had.
I think there are a lot of major holes in the logic behind vouchers.
Our students, they're not worth any less than they are in an ISD.
My first priority is to fund public education.
What is the role of government? What about separation of church and state? And what is the consequence for those who are still in the public schools?